Last week in Michigan politics, as the U.S. takes military action in Iran, Michigan members of Congress speak on whether to rein in the president's power. 13 on Your Side looks at the local impacts it could have. Plus, election season is kicking into high gear as candidates continue to descend on all-important West Michigan. Updates on pitches to voters. And a new plan in Lansing to halt new data center projects for the time being. Why lawmakers behind it say the state needs time. I'm Josh Alburtus, and this is your 13 on Your Side rundown. We begin this week on Capitol Hill, where lawmakers voted on whether or not to back war powers resolutions and require President Donald Trump to go through Congress to take further action. Federal lawmakers from West Michigan on both sides of the aisle weighed in ahead of the House's vote.
War is not a slogan. It's not a political strategy. It is a life and death decision that puts American sons and daughters at risk and sends our hard-earned tax dollars overseas. That's why, under our Constitution, the decision to enter a war does not belong to one person. It belongs to all of us. For all these reasons, I'll be voting today in favor of the War Powers Resolution to constrain President Trump from taking further military action against Iran without congressional approval.
Peace through strength does not mean another open-ended war of the past. Operation Epic Fury is a defensive action using overwhelming force to protect the American people from an imminent and growing threat. I urge my colleagues to vote against this resolution, hoping to score political points by tying the president's hands in the face of danger. It is time that we defend our liberty, our freedom, our neighbors, and this great nation in the face of Iran's systematic terror.
The Senate voted Wednesday to reject a war powers resolution, and in the end, the House voted Thursday to reject a resolution in that chamber as well. People are watching what's happening in the Middle East closely, with many polls suggesting many Americans oppose a prolonged war in the region. 13 on Your Side's Michael Martin spoke with people in West Michigan earlier this week to get their reaction.
Thing. I've heard they're supposed to hike up oil prices, obviously.
Ticking up Monday.
So it's been pretty stable so far. So, doesn't mean nothing's going to change when, what happened here recently.
People are feeling the weight.
To see what's going on there is heartbreaking. And so I try to stay in the background.
Doing their best to go about their lives.
I have to get gas. So if I have to fill up when it's more pricey, I don't really have a choice.
The impact goes beyond overextended checking accounts.
I don't care how much gas costs if it saves lives. Just that I'm sad that American military men are being killed.
Lawmakers like Senator Gary Peters share the sentiment.
Well, certainly I'm very concerned about this military operation because I'm not sure what the president intends to do.
He feels the military actions taken over the weekend needed congressional approval.
And it's unprecedented for a president to take the United States into war without talking to the American people and making sure the American people want to see this happen.
Peters says the only exception would be if the country were facing an imminent threat, something he argues was not the case here.
Because if you shred the Constitution for war powers, you're likely to be shredding it for a whole host of things that impact people's lives. So it's wrong.
And as U.S.-Israeli military actions continued in the Middle East, there are more questions about the impact the conflict will have on life here in West Michigan. While gas prices were already ticking up this week, we wanted to know what else could be affected. Michael continued to follow that story.
But there is a lot of volatility in a lot of markets right now, with things all across the board.
Constantly sourcing fresh produce and groceries is already a challenge this time of year for people like Alex Quartz, manager of Ken's Fruit Market in Grand Rapids.
The South had a lot of weather issues this year with all the cold, so that's putting a lot of pressure on markets.
But how do higher gas prices play in?
It definitely does, because there's transportation that's involved in every step of bringing produce to our stores.
Associate Dean of GVSU's Seidman College of Business, Paul Isley, says Ultimately, the impact on our economy will come down to how long the military activity lasts.
If it were to all stop today and everything went back to the way it was before, within a month, we wouldn't even realize it happened economically.
Right now, about 5% of global shipping is stuck waiting to enter or leave the Persian Gulf.
Which means those ships can't make it to where they would pick up cargo and move it to someplace else. It has drastically changed the amount of natural gas that can reach Asia and Europe.
And when global shipping slows down, so does the flow of energy and raw materials around the world.
That's a big deal because natural gas is a feedstock for lots of chemicals, lots of pharmaceuticals, and for fertilizers that make your food.
The effects will begin to stack the longer we have to deal with the international uncertainty.
There's a lot of fear that this will start to reignite inflation if it goes on for a long enough period of time.
Prices largely unaffected at places like Ken's Fruit Market, at least for now.
We try to maintain as tight of a supply chain as we can, so we have multiple sources that we can get stuff from. We try to stay on top of it.
Dr. Isley told us gas shortages weren't a real possibility. The U.S. produces enough oil on its own to last even an extended conflict. The worst we could see are higher prices. Now to your voice, your vote, and the race for governor in Michigan. The latest local visits from high-profile candidates coming just this week. Both latest visits again highlighting West Michigan's political centrality as campaign season starts to kick into high gear, with candidates hoping to zero in on voters' top issues amid a potential interesting landscape in the race.
Just someone who wanted to know more.
Kimberly Williams is on the lookout, having not yet decided who will get her vote in Michigan's all-important race for governor.
Frankly, I have been a straight Democratic ticket voter for a long time, and I'm not sure if that's always been beneficial for my community, and I'm open to voting outside of that.
In her quest to find her choice, she came to a town hall on Tuesday in her own Boston Square neighborhood, featuring former Detroit mayor and independent candidate Mike Duggan.
The governor came in to solve one problem, make the quality of life a little bit better. What would you like to see the next governor do?
Issues from audience members including education, the Great Lakes, property taxes, civil rights, data centers, and affordable housing.
I want to have a model ordinance for local communities to ease the restrictions, not what the state's proposing, but basically overriding the local jurisdiction. I don't agree with that. But put in the incentives and change the local zoning, and we can build. There's no question about it.
West Michigan's political importance shining once again as candidates have begun to descend on Grand Rapids. Just a day before, Democratic candidate and Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson came to town for a roundtable on housing.
I was on house for about a year. It's a daily struggle not only for me, but it is for a lot of those in shelter or even the ones out on the street.
The visit coming after the unveiling of her campaign's housing agenda.
Working to build out this proposal, and that our proposal specifically emphasizes the need for that tax credit, the need for that down payment support, not just for first-time homeowners, but for second-time homeowners, middle-class families moving up in the system, and workers moving into new communities.
Both visits come amidst an interesting time in the race. The Detroit Regional Chamber releasing a new poll last week showing in a hypothetical three-way matchup, Duggan leading both Benson and Republican Congressman John James amongst both its registered and likely voters. Among the poll's definite voters, Benson was ahead. All three leads were within the margin of error.
I want every single family who wants to call Michigan home to be able to afford a home in the community they want to live in.
People seem like they felt good about the answers, and you could see there's huge openness to an independent candidate.
And was that the case for someone like Williams?
I'm intrigued, but I haven't made my decision yet.
Of course, candidates for the major parties still have yet to be decided, so hopefuls will have more time to make their pitches, and voters will have more time to make their first decisions. Primaries are set for early August. And a familiar face for many in West Michigan is making a major career shift. Former broadcast meteorologist Terry DeBoer announced late this week she would run to represent West Michigan in Congress. A federal filing shows DeBoer will seek the Republican nomination in Michigan's 3rd congressional district, which includes parts of Kent, Ottawa, and Muskegon counties, and is currently held by second-term Democratic Congresswoman Hillary Skolton. DeBoer is targeting priorities including border security, social security protection, price transparency in healthcare, and what the campaign calls fiscal sanity. Federal filings list 2 other Republicans in the race and Skolton as the lone Democrat so far. Online harassment may be a big concern and consideration for those thinking about a run for public office. But state lawmakers think they may have a plan to help protect candidates. Coming up, how a bill now on its way through Lansing looks to shield candidates' personal information. At the state capitol, data centers continue to be a hot topic in Michigan. Now, a bipartisan group of state lawmakers is proposing a pause on new data center approvals. If passed, that would last from when these bills take effect through next spring. And those we talk to behind it hope it'll help give the state time to talk and come up with a comprehensive way to handle with these new developments. It's been a bitter debate for a while now in Michigan.
The only sentiment I hear loud and clear is none of us wanted it here.
Data centers and what many locals fear they may bring.
We want to just at the very least make sure that the cost of everything doesn't come to the residents.
Concerns balanced with potential investment has left state government trying to decide how to approach it.
Data centers and the good paying jobs that they do provide communities, how do we bifurcate that with regulations and checks on the process that ensure if they are coming to Michigan, they're not using our water and they're not driving up energy costs and they're entering into community benefit agreements.
Now, bills moving through the legislature are looking to halt new data center project approvals for the time being.
What we're learning from the people as these come to communities is people want us to take a pause. They want regulations.
A pause would allow us to reevaluate this and see where can we come to a compromise, because I think that's what it's going to take here.
Republican State Representative Jennifer Warts joining with lawmakers including Democrat Dylan Wagella to put a pause on local governments authorizing new data center projects through next April.
Until hopefully we have just a broader conversation here and come up with some good guardrails on how we're going to bring data centers into Michigan.
The state's Public Service Commission would also be barred during that time from making certain approvals between an electric utility and a qualified data center.
And I think it would be in Michigan's best interest that until we have the environmental, the economic regulations in place, to put a pause on further data center expansion in the state of Michigan.
And these bills were introduced late last week and are now on to committee. And controversy continues over new data center proposals in Michigan. Microsoft held a meeting Tuesday afternoon in Gaines Township for one of multiple it wants to build here in the region. The company scheduled the meeting after receiving pushback from the community. We heard from one of the locals who went to that event seeking information, and from Consumers Energy, as potential energy usage for data center projects has been a big concern. Living in Gaines Township, Wendell Schmidt has had questions on a key town topic.
What I was interested in is some of the ecological aspects, also a noise level. Question came up in my mind as to how we would be impacted.
So he came to an informational event on Tuesday on the proposed data center project from Microsoft set for his community. The room featuring posters and papers outlining Microsoft's view of necessity and responsibility.
It's a good impression when you walk in. There's a lot of displays and people at every station to answer your question. So that's helpful.
It comes as a group of state lawmakers have begun eyeing a major pause, potentially halting local governments from making new data center authorizations through next April.
What we're learning from the people as these come to communities is people want us to take a pause. They want regulations.
A pause would allow us to reevaluate this and see where can we come to a compromise, because I think that's what it's going to take here.
Another major concern across the state has been that of electric use, given the vast amount of energy sites may require. Many have questioned whether certain projects could leave local ratepayers on the hook for costs. But in the case of the Gaines Township proposal, Consumers Energy was also there Tuesday night to answer questions.
We're actually obligated by the Michigan Public Service Commission to prove that we can meet the need of today's demand with energy both today and in the future. legislature. And so we're committed to doing that. We have the supply, and we're also committed to doing it while keeping rates as low as we're able to keep them.
I felt the presentation was helpful and informative, but you do have to ask questions.
And that proposal in Gaines Township still needed to be fully considered by local officials. Election security and reform have also been big topics in Michigan. On that front, State House lawmakers passed a pair of bills just this week. The first would no longer require a candidate's street address on nominating petitions, but those might still be found through other documentation that may be not so widely circulated. The lawmaker behind it lauded it as a way to help protect candidates' personal information. The bill would also require that candidates running to be representatives to Congress disclose whether they reside in the district they're running for. And should certain candidates die, withdraw, or be disqualified, the other bill would only allow new ballots with a replacement candidate to be printed 55 days or more ahead of the election. The sponsor says this would keep multiple ballots from being in circulation when some forms of voting have begun. How to bridge the persistent divides of the modern age and still make good policy. It's a question that a bipartisan group of political experts just discussed with local leaders late this week. After the break, what insight those former officials were able to give at this year's Grand Rapids Policy Conference. Public trust, voter education, and election security, all very important topics these days. Leaders gathered at this year's Grand Rapids Policy Conference to hear on those topics from a group of bipartisan experts. And we were there to get the details.
I agree with the two Republicans here.
A sign of unity that may appear more and more scarce in modern American politics, at least publicly.
Who out there is doing a good job of reconciling differences, engendering trust, and leading with civility in an effective way? I can't think of anyone. The fact that you have to ask that question is sad.
With public trust, voter education, and election security all talked about topics, these political experts and insiders, a bipartisan group from the Democracy Defense Project, speaking to local leaders at Friday's Grand Rapids Policy Conference.
What you see is not what really is happening. There is more collaboration, more trust in elected environments than you see. In fact, it's far more.
Still, this former congressman felt it constructive to acknowledge potential issues.
We trust the system that we have. We, as leaders, are expected to do our part to ensure that our election process is protected, and that we raise issues when they come up, that we deal with them, and that we take them seriously. We don't just deny that they exist.
So what can people do?
Encourage community conversation so that trust is built among ourselves.
Other avenues encouraged included fostering interest among younger generations in schools to learn the facts of their government, and taking it upon leaders' selves to be willing to come to agreement.
We need to get back to this idea that 360 million people in America don't all think alike. They've got very different views on a lot of things, and if you're going to be able to do any business, you're going to have to figure out how you do compromises.
Our system has been strained before, polarization has been there before, we've been through this before. We'll come back.
Might want to get those art supplies ready because a popular 2024 contest is now back for the 2026 elections. How your design of an iconic badge of honor could be featured across the state in these all-important elections. That's next. Voters in Michigan will choose Democratic and Republican candidates for the state's top offices in primaries in about 5 months. And this election season, the I Voted sticker competition is back. This is video of last year's winners. Anyone interested in entering has to create their design using the entry form on the state's website. It needs to include the phrase I voted, and it has to be nonpartisan. Designs are due by May 1st. We have links and more information at 13onyourside.com. And that's the rundown for your week in Michigan politics. Be sure to keep up with all the top political stories of the day, both on air and online at 13onyourside.com.
Bye.